Without this upgrade, the exotic wood that I used on this project would have been a nightmare. Don't get me wrong, there's always another tool for the job, but I truly am thankful for the time savings on this project. Speaking of which, what is today's project? Well, it's pretty simple. I'm making a picture frame, but it's not just a picture frame. See, for the last 9 years, I've actually been working on my master's degree, and finally, it arrived in the mail. And what better way for someone that enjoys woodworking to celebrate such a milestone than to build his own diploma frame. We'll go over to the jointer and I'm gonna show you how we're gonna tackle this really figured piece of wood that a straight knife jointer is gonna have some issues with. Even sometimes planing this kind of wood, just with the ways that the grain seems to move. I would say that this is probably gonna be easier than something like a curly maple or something of that kind, but definitely a challenge. One of the reasons why a jointer has issues with this is unless I go extremely slowly over the jointer, I end up with undulations. It makes it so that I always have to clean up my jointer passes. The other thing that ends up happening is it's hard to push through because you always have the knives just pushing back on you. I end up having to make sure my knives are extremely sharp, take very, very small passes, and grain orientation is extremely important. Otherwise, there's tear out. Fortunately, just in time for this project, I've upgraded my machine thanks to the people over at Find by Tool. And they just asked me if I'd like to try one of their helical cutter heads. They didn't carry one at the time specifically for my jointer, but once we went back and forth, took some measurements and looked at the schematics, they've now got a listing for my particular 6 1/8 inch Craftsman jointer planer. So if you wanted an affordable way to get into a helical cutter head, it might be a good idea. So far, I've been very impressed with the installation process. I was very impressed with the performance. But as you can see, the advantage with this helical cutter head, everything is making slicing cuts one blade at a time. It's a very nice shearing cut. It leaves a beautiful surface finish. It's a lot quieter too. This new cutter head on my jointer made a huge difference, but stick around because we're also going to get into building a custom profile. I'm not using a router for this. It's all happening table saw and with hand tools. With all the edges of the boards flat, square, and parallel to one another, I spent a little bit of time working out on a scrap piece of poplar, exact angles and heights for the profile I wanted to build. And so here I just set my fence to some pencil marks that I had laid across, and I'm passing boards across to create this initial cove profile. I've raised the blade a little bit and I am doing some final cleanup passes. With my initial cove set in place, I figured out the angle I had cut off of my original test piece and set up the table saw to take off the edge that I have right here. You'll actually see that after I make that cut, I'm going back to my test piece and just checking that everything's the way that I wanted it before continuing to cut my work pieces. From there, I'm making a rabbet on one edge. This is going to be where the photo, the mat, the glass, and the backer piece all sit. The final cut I had to make was just moving the fence to the other side and taking this little piece off right here. Coming off of the saw, this is what we are left with. We've got the beginnings of a profile, but we're not quite there. It's very interesting on this stuff. I've got this area here. The grain is running this direction. And then it's running in this direction here and this direction here. So that's one of the reasons why this is so hard to use without a helical head. And even using my block plane and my sander, I have to be very, very careful with this. Fortunately, everything went really smoothly with a little bit of block plane and sanding. I was able to move on to cutting my miters. I went back and forth quite a bit on what method I wanted to use for reinforcing my miters. I ended up settling on using the biscuit jointer. It's been a little while since I used it, and so that's what I'm doing here. Really quick and easy, and at the end of the day, everything worked out. I've placed these clamping blocks at complementary angles so that my clamps can just come across. And because this is a relatively dark wood, I'm gonna do the dark tight bond too. At this point, there's nothing left but to just start gluing and hope that I've prepared enough. I hope that you're enjoying the videos so far. If you are, be sure to drop a like and even a subscribe if you really want to see more. It really helps the channel. Thanks. I think that's as good as we're getting it for now. There's gonna be a little bit of filler in a couple places I see. Some sanding to even everything out. I think everything is gonna come together really nicely. Because each portion of the frame was done by hand individually, I had to spend about an hour, hour and a half smoothing everything out and making everything work together, and then spent another 10 minutes or so using the sawdust and glue trick to fill in all of the gaps before applying my maker's mark and starting to lay down finish. For this one, it was Osmopolix Satin Oil. After that, I got to do something I've never done before, which was cut glass that I had sitting around the shop. It was perfect for this project, and so finally got to use it, and everything worked surprisingly well. Now, the glass did. This way, right along the line, and the mat was a little bit of a nightmare, which I only show part of here, but I used this bevel cutter and just really had issues getting really straight and clean cuts on everything. I think I got to a place that I'm pretty happy with, but I still haven't ruled out the option of going in a completely different direction with this. I'm gonna make anybody who actually does this for a living cringe at my use of tape here especially, and the fact that I so terribly did the mat. I'm gonna call this mat temporary because I really am not happy with it, but this video needs to get out. Even after this point, things were still a little bit lacking on the front end of the frame, but my wife and I came up with an idea and used her Cricut vinyl cutter to add an embellished logo on the frame. Overall, I'm really happy with the way that this turned out. Of course, there's always things that you can learn from every project, but overall, I'm proud to say that I made this frame, and I don't think that it's the last one I'm going to make. So leave your tips and suggestions in the comments below on how we can do this better. And until next time, make sawdust, not excuses.